It was one of those early winter mornings when the world seemed to move in slow motion. The streets outside the small downtown cafe were still wet from the night rain, shimmering beneath the pale glow of the street lamps. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans, cinnamon, and the faint trace of nostalgia that clung to every chipped mug and worn wooden table. Clara Bennett moved like clockwork, steady, efficient, and invisible. At 28, she had perfected the art of blending into the background, her soft-spoken nature and steady rhythm making her a fixture of the place. The cafe was called Morning Haven, a name that promised warmth and comfort, though the people who worked there rarely experienced either. The manager, Mr. Lowell, ran the place with a miser's heart and a bully's tone. Every smile Clara offered customers was shadowed by the sharp bark of his voice from behind the counter. "Faster, Clara. Wipe that table again. Don't forget to upsell the muffins." He cared more about the profit margin than the people who made it possible. For Clara, however, it was a job, the kind that paid just enough to keep her younger brother in school and their small apartment from losing heat in December. By 6:30, the regulars began to trickle in. Construction workers grabbing their caffeine before the job site, exhausted nurses finishing night shifts, and a few office types with faces lit by the blue glow of their phones. Clara greeted each one by name, remembering their usual orders not because she had to, but because she genuinely cared. That quiet decency was something no one seemed to notice anymore. No one except the handful of customers who returned not just for the coffee, but for the gentleness in her eyes when she asked how they were holding up. At 7 sharp, the delivery truck pulled up, tires splashing through puddles. Clara glanced up from the espresso machine to see a man in a faded gray hoodie and weather-beaten jeans step out. He looked older than he probably was, maybe late 30s, with a lean build and the tired gait of someone who'd been up long before dawn. His hands were red from cold, gripping a clipboard and a few invoices already smudged with rain. She assumed he was one of the new delivery drivers, the kind who came and went without notice. Mr. Lowell didn't look up from the register. "Clara, sign for the delivery. I'm busy checking last week's numbers." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. The cold air bit into her skin immediately, turning her breath into small clouds. The man was unloading boxes from the back of the truck, coffee beans, milk cartons, sugar, the essentials of her daily routine. He glanced at her and gave a polite nod. "Morning," he said, his voice low, steady but edged with fatigue. "Morning," Clara replied, taking the clipboard from him. "You're new, right?" He nodded. "First week. Been covering for someone on medical leave." She noticed the calluses on his hands, the faint tremor in his fingers as he handed over the pen. His shoes were soaked through, laces frayed. Something about him felt out of place. Not just poor but weary in a deeper way, like someone carrying more weight than a morning shift should allow. As he turned to head back toward his truck, she heard the faint jingle of coins in his pocket and saw him pause, scanning the chalkboard menu through the window. He hesitated. She knew that look. Hunger mixed with pride. When he came inside, shaking off the cold, he stepped quietly to the counter. Clara watched him count the change in his hand. It wasn't much, maybe $1.50. The cheapest coffee was $2 and change. Mr. Lowell barely glanced at him. "You buying or just browsing?" he asked, tone dripping with disdain. The man flushed slightly, straightened, and nodded. "Just coffee," he said. He placed his coins on the counter, his voice steady but soft, the kind of voice that didn't like asking for help. "That won't cover it," Lowell replied, already turning back to the register. Clara didn't even think. She reached for the old cash jar by the pastry case, the one where she and the others tossed loose coins for tips that Lowell rarely distributed fairly, and dropped a few into the register. "I got it," she said quietly. Lowell shot her a sharp look. "You got what?" "His coffee. It's fine. I'll cover it." "We're not running a charity, Clara," he sneered. "No," she replied evenly, "we're running a cafe. And in a cafe people drink coffee." The man's lips twitched as if fighting a smile. Lowell muttered something under his breath about soft-hearted staff, and disappeared into the office. Clara poured the coffee herself, a full, steaming cup, and slid it toward him. "Here. No charge." He hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she said simply. "But it's cold and you look like you've been up all night." Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers soft but firm, his filled with quiet gratitude he didn't quite know how to express. He took the cup, nodding once. "Thank you." "You're welcome." As he stepped aside to a corner table, Clara returned to her duties, unaware that the small gesture had already begun rewriting the trajectory of her life. The man watched her from across the cafe, the calm precision of her movements, the way she diffused a customer's irritation with a few gentle words, the unspoken grace that seemed too rare in the world he knew. There was something profoundly grounding about her. And though she saw only a weary driver nursing a free cup of coffee, the truth was that the man sitting there owned everything in that room. The chairs, the walls, the logo on her apron, even the paycheck that arrived late every other Friday. Ethan Cross had built an empire of small restaurants under a chain of shell companies. It had started as an investment experiment, a way to understand working-class consumer patterns after selling his tech firm 5 years earlier. He rarely revealed ownership of any single location, preferring to remain anonymous to see how his managers operated without the shadow of oversight. Over time, though, the experiment had turned into something else, a reminder of how easily power corrupted, and how the people at the top often lost touch with the humanity beneath the numbers. This cafe had been underperforming for months. Ethan had read reports of low staff morale, rising customer complaints, and missing funds. He decided to see it for himself. Disguised as a driver for a partner supplier, he had come unannounced, expecting to confirm his suspicions and move on. He had not expected her. When he finished the coffee, rich, simple, and made with care, he stood and approached the counter again. Clara looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Everything okay?" "Best coffee I've had in a while," he said. Then after a pause, "You didn't even ask my name." She smiled faintly. "Didn't need to. You looked like you needed a break, not a form to fill out." He nodded slowly. There was something refreshing about her lack of curiosity, as if she wasn't trying to guess his worth or rank him in her world. "I'm Ethan," he said finally. "Clara," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Clara." "Likewise, Ethan." Behind them, Lowell emerged again, his expression sour. "Break's over, Clara. We don't have time for idle chatter." Ethan's brows lifted slightly at the tone, but he said nothing. Instead, he gave Clara a subtle nod of thanks and left, the bell above the door chiming softly in his wake. She watched him disappear into the gray morning, thinking only that he was another stranger passing through her small orbit. By the time she turned back to the counter, Lowell was already muttering, "You're too nice for your own good. That kind of bleeding heart stuff doesn't get you anywhere in life." Clara didn't reply. She knew better than to argue with him. But something inside her stirred, a small defiance that had learned to survive years of being overlooked. Maybe kindness didn't make her rich, but it made her human. And that, she believed, was worth something. An hour later, Ethan sat in his parked SUV a few blocks away, watching the cafe from behind tinted windows. The steam on his breath fogged the glass as he reviewed the file open on his tablet. The audit reports, the employee complaints, the declining revenue graphs. Everything confirmed what he already suspected. Someone was siphoning money. But the question that lingered now wasn't just about missing dollars, it was about people. About how someone like Clara, who worked 12-hour days for little pay, could still find it in her heart to give away what little she had. He scrolled through internal messages, noting how Mr. Lowell frequently requested additional funds for repairs and marketing that never materialized. The man's emails dripped with corporate jargon masking greed. Ethan closed the file and looked back at the cafe window. Clara was still moving behind the counter, hair tied neatly, smile unwavering even when customers complained about trivial things. He leaned back thoughtful. People like her were rare, anchors in a world obsessed with gain. He made a mental note: observe for 1 week. Do not reveal identity. Outside, the rain began again, soft, relentless, cleansing. It tapped against the windshield like a metronome marking the rhythm of his decision. Somewhere between curiosity and conscience, something shifted inside him. He wasn't just going to investigate a failing cafe. He was going to understand why people like Clara kept giving to a world that gave them so little in return. That evening, when the last customer left and the closed sign flipped, Clara sat alone in the break room, counting the register. The numbers were off again, as always, and she knew better than to question it. Lowell had a habit of taking the difference home under the pretense of balancing inventory. She recorded the figures, locked the drawer, and exhaled slowly. Another day survived. Another day to begin again tomorrow. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger brother, Liam, got the scholarship results. "Didn't make it. Sorry." Clara's shoulders slumped. She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Don't give up. We'll figure something out." She couldn't afford college for him, not on her wages, but she couldn't tell him that. Not yet. She finished cleaning, turned off the lights, and stepped out into the drizzle. The cold hit her instantly, but she pulled her coat tighter and started the long walk home. As she passed the alley near the cafe, she noticed a man sitting on the curb, his hood pulled low. It was the same delivery driver. He was writing something in a small notebook, the light from a nearby street lamp illuminating the faint steam rising from his cup, the same cup she had given him hours ago. He looked up when she passed. Their eyes met briefly. He offered a polite nod. "Long day." She smiled faintly. "They're all long." "You do good work," he said. She laughed softly. "That depends who you ask." "I'm asking." Something in his tone, earnest, grounded, caught her off guard. She gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. "Thanks. Have a good night, Ethan." "You too, Clara." As she walked away, he closed the notebook. On the last page, beneath the scribbles of financial observations and notes, he wrote one sentence that he hadn't planned on writing that morning. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's the heartbeat of this place." Back in her apartment, Clara sat by the window with a cup of instant coffee, watching the rain slide down the glass. Somewhere deep inside, a strange calm replaced her exhaustion. She didn't know why, but something about that man, the quiet way he looked at the world, had stayed with her. And miles away, in a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Ethan Cross set down his notebook and looked at the folder labeled Morning Haven Cafe, Internal Review. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or brand expansion. He was thinking about a woman who bought coffee for a stranger without expecting anything in return. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, almost amused by the irony. Let's see what really happens when kindness runs a business. The next morning began like any other, though Clara couldn't quite shake the feeling that something unseen had shifted. The rain had cleared, replaced by a crisp sunlight that turned the cafe windows into mirrors. The smell of fresh grounds filled the air, and the hum of the old refrigerator blended with the low chatter of early customers. It was peaceful, the kind of morning she usually cherished, until the doorbell chimed, and in walked the man she least expected to see again. Ethan. The delivery man. He wore the same worn jacket, but his eyes seemed less clouded with fatigue. Clara blinked, surprised but not displeased. "You're back," she said, forcing her voice to sound casual as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Had to make sure the inventory was properly logged," he said, placing a delivery sheet on the counter. His tone was light, but there was something observant about him, the kind of attention that made people feel both seen and studied. Mr. Lowell emerged from the back, scowling. "You again? Didn't we settle all deliveries yesterday?" Ethan smiled politely. Some invoices needed signatures. Lowell sighed, muttering about disorganized suppliers, then stalked off toward his office, muttering numbers under his breath. Ethan turned to Clara once the manager disappeared. "I didn't expect to see you again," she admitted. "I could say the same," he replied, then added quietly, "but I wanted to say thank you properly for the coffee. Not everyone would have done that." She shrugged, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It was just coffee. Maybe to you. Not to me." There was a pause, one that felt heavier than either of them intended. Then Ethan smiled and motioned toward a small table by the window. "Mind if I sit for a bit? I'll stay out of your way." "Sure," she said, glancing toward the office door to make sure Lowell wasn't watching. "As long as you don't mind the noise." "I like noise," Ethan said softly. "It reminds me life's still happening." He took a seat and opened a small leather notebook. While Clara worked, he jotted down notes, occasionally glancing up as if the rhythm of her movements said more than her words ever could. To her, it was just another customer. To him, it was research, a live study in authenticity. That afternoon, the cafe grew busier than usual. A bus tour had stopped in unexpectedly, and within minutes, every chair was filled. Lowell barked orders from behind the counter while Clara and the other waitress, Joy, moved at a blur. Cups clattered, steam hissed, and the register beeped incessantly. In the chaos, a frail woman at a corner table spilled her coffee. Clara rushed over, crouched, and wiped it up, smiling as though accidents were nothing to worry about. "You're fine, ma'am. Let me get you another cup, on the house." Lowell, overhearing, stormed over. "No freebies, Clara. I told you that last week." "It was an accident," Clara said, standing slowly. She didn't even get to drink it. "Rules are rules," he snapped. "You want to pay for it yourself?" "I will," she said simply. Ethan had watched the entire exchange. When Lowell walked off, he spoke quietly to the older woman. "Don't worry, ma'am. Your coffee's covered. Consider it a favor from a friend." The woman smiled, and when she left, she slipped a small folded note onto the counter. Clara unfolded it later. "Kindness is never wasted." The handwriting was elegant, too refined for a tourist. She tucked the note into her pocket like a secret charm. Ethan stayed through the afternoon rush. He noticed everything: the broken air conditioner vent that Lowell claimed had been repaired, the way he pocketed a handful of cash from the register mid-shift, the way Clara never once took a break. She was running on fumes, yet her smile never cracked. When the crowd thinned and the sun dipped behind the buildings, Ethan rose to leave. "You work too hard," he said quietly. "Someone has to." "Maybe. But that someone shouldn't always be you." She gave a small laugh. "Tell that to my landlord." He hesitated as if wanting to say more, then decided against it. "See you around, Clara." "See you, Ethan." He stepped outside into the golden light of sunset. For a long moment, he stood still, watching her through the glass as she cleaned a table. There was grace even in the way she wrung out a cloth. He couldn't decide if it was admiration or guilt stirring in his chest. Guilt that people like her built the world he profited from. Over the next few days, Ethan became a fixture of Morning Haven. He arrived with new deliveries, each time under a different pretense. Sometimes it was missing invoices, sometimes a broken crate, sometimes follow-up checks. He brought warmth with him, the kind that subtly altered the air of the room. The customers liked him. Joy teased Clara about having an admirer, though Clara denied it vehemently, cheeks pink. But there was something strange about Ethan, something quietly deliberate. He listened more than he spoke, asked small questions that revealed big things. How long have you worked here? Do they treat you fairly? Who handles payroll? Harmless on the surface but probing underneath. Clara noticed but she didn't mind. Maybe she was flattered by his curiosity, or maybe she just needed someone to ask. 5 years, she said one evening as they closed. That's how long I've been here. Mr. Lowell took over management 3 years ago, and things haven't been the same since. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded. How so? He cuts hours, pockets tips, lies about overtime pay. But most of us can't afford to complain. There's nowhere else to go. He frowned. Have you ever reported him? To who? The owners? We don't even know who they are. Just some big group out in New York, apparently. They don't care about us. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked away, hiding the flicker of anger that rose unbidden. He was the owner and she was right. They had been distant, detached, indifferent. For years he had measured success in graphs and percentages. But sitting here now, in the smell of burnt espresso and overworked lives, those metrics felt meaningless. What about you? Clara asked suddenly. You've been delivering a lot this week. You always this busy? He smiled faintly. You could say that. I've been checking in on things. What kind of things? Ones that matter, he said. And before she could ask more, he changed the subject. Do you ever think about leaving this place? She hesitated. Every day. But it's hard to dream when you're counting tips to survive. Ethan nodded, silent. Inside, a seed of resolve began to grow. That night, he called his assistant, Emily, from his hotel room. She answered on the first ring. Mr. Cross, did you find what you were looking for? He hesitated before answering. More than I expected. I need a full audit on Morning Haven, unfiltered. Payroll, supply orders, manager expenditures. And Emily? Yes. Make sure it's confidential. Lowell doesn't know who I am yet, and I intend to keep it that way. Understood. He hung up and exhaled slowly. The city skyline glittered outside his window, sharp and indifferent. He thought of Clara wiping tables long after closing, her hands red from bleach, her shoulders squared against exhaustion. He had built empires on algorithms and acquisitions, but she was the kind of person who built meaning. And somewhere in the quiet of that realization, Ethan Cross began to question the purpose of everything he owned. 2 days later, chaos erupted. The espresso machine broke mid-rush. Steam hissed violently, spraying scalding water across the counter. Customers gasped. Joy screamed. Clara instinctively shielded the register, unplugging the cord before it caught fire. Her hand burned slightly but she didn't care. Lowell emerged, furious. What did you do? It overheated. Clara said. Do you have any idea how much that machine costs? I was trying to keep it from exploding. You probably caused it. Before Clara could respond, Ethan, who had been seated quietly near the back, stepped forward. Actually, I saw the pressure gauge from my seat. It was well past the safety limit before she touched it. Lowell's eyes narrowed. And who the hell are you? Someone who pays attention, Ethan replied evenly. Stay out of it. This is employee business. Ethan's gaze hardened. Maybe you should treat your employees like human beings. The machine overheated because you've ignored maintenance for months. Lowell's face turned red. You got a lot of nerve talking to me like that, delivery boy? Maybe, Ethan said, his voice calm but edged with steel. But maybe someone needs to. The room went silent. Clara stood frozen, half in shock, half in awe. No one ever talked back to Lowell, not even the suppliers. But Ethan did. And for reasons she couldn't explain, his words made her feel safe. Lowell eventually stormed off to his office, muttering curses. Ethan turned to Clara. You okay? She nodded, flexing her burned hand. It's fine. Thanks for speaking up. You shouldn't have to thank anyone for that, he said quietly. Respect is the minimum, not a luxury. Their eyes met again, brief but charged. Something unspoken passed between them. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen. That evening, the cafe closed early for repairs. Ethan walked her halfway home, the city bathed in amber streetlight. They spoke softly about small things, books, favorite coffees, the kind of lives they wished they had. For once, the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full of understanding. Why do you care so much? She asked suddenly, stopping at the crosswalk. About what? About this place. About people like me. You don't even know us. He hesitated, searching for an answer he couldn't give yet. Maybe because I've forgotten what real work looks like, he said at last. And I think people like you remind me. She tilted her head, curious. That sounds like something rich people say when they want to feel better about themselves. He laughed softly, unoffended. Maybe it is. They reached her apartment building. She turned to face him. Thank you again. For everything. Get some rest, Clara, he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. Big changes are coming. She smiled faintly. If only. When she disappeared inside, Ethan lingered on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, staring up at the flickering streetlight. The truth pressed against his chest, heavy and undeniable. She had no idea who he really was. And soon that secret would change everything. That night, in a dimly lit office high above the city, Emily sent over the audit report. Ethan scrolled through it, each line confirming his anger. Thousands missing. Falsified expenses. Stolen wages. Lowell had bled the cafe dry, and the owners, his own corporate shell, had never even noticed. He closed the laptop and whispered to himself, tomorrow the game's end. Because the delivery man everyone overlooked was about to remind them who really signed their paychecks. Morning Haven opened late the next day. The usual hum of chatter and clinking cups had been replaced by an uneasy silence. Mr. Lowell paced behind the counter, barking orders that no one seemed eager to follow. Clara arrived early as always, unaware that the world she'd known for 5 long years was about to tilt on its axis. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, this time not as the weary delivery man in a faded jacket, but in crisp jeans, a wool coat and quiet confidence. He looked different, though Clara couldn't quite pinpoint why. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a purpose she hadn't noticed before. He nodded politely when she glanced his way, but his gaze lingered only long enough to make her wonder what exactly he was waiting for. Mr. Lowell was unusually nervous that morning. His phone buzzed constantly. He kept muttering about some corporate visit that had been scheduled for inspection. Clara didn't think much of it. Audits happened occasionally, though they never changed anything. The upper management never really cared what went on in their small-town branch. But still, something about today felt different. The air was thicker. The regular customers seemed to sense it too, speaking in hushed tones as they sipped their coffee. Ethan checked his watch. 10 minutes until the meeting. He had spent the night combing through the audit documents. The proof was irrefutable. Lowell had stolen more than $30,000 over 2 years, skimming employee wages, faking equipment orders, and claiming refund allowances for repairs that never existed. And worse, he'd retaliated against anyone who questioned him, forcing them out with fabricated write-ups. Ethan's original plan had been to handle things quietly, to fire Lowell through proper channels. But after seeing Clara's blistered hands, after watching her take abuse in silence for the sake of others, he'd changed his mind. This wasn't going to be quiet. This was going to be justice. Clara was restocking napkins when the front door swung open. A sleek black car idled outside, and 3 people stepped in, 2 men in suits and a woman holding a briefcase. The kind of people who didn't drink diner coffee unless it came with a contract. Lowell rushed to greet them, his smile so forced it was almost painful. "Welcome, welcome," he said, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. "We weren't expecting corporate so soon." The woman smiled thinly. "We received notice of an internal audit. Is this a bad time?" "Oh no, not at all," Lowell said quickly, his voice cracking. "Just wish I'd known ahead. We've had some staffing issues, but we're running smoothly." Ethan rose from his seat, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Actually," he said, his voice steady, "I think this is the perfect time." Lowell turned, startled. "You again? What are you still doing here?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Finishing some business." He walked closer, each step deliberate. "I believe you're Mr. Gregory Lowell?" Lowell frowned. "Yes. And you are?" Ethan extended a hand. "Ethan Cross." The name hit the room like a dropped plate. The auditors straightened immediately, exchanging quick glances. Clara froze, her breath catching. She knew that name, everyone in the restaurant business did. Ethan Cross wasn't just some executive. He was the founder of the Crosswood Hospitality Group, the quiet powerhouse behind more than 40 restaurant chains nationwide. Lowell's smile faltered. You're the regional director?" Ethan's expression hardened. "No. I'm the owner." Silence blanketed the cafe. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Clara felt the world sway beneath her feet. Lowell stammered. There must be some mistake. I wasn't told." "That's because I didn't announce it," Ethan interrupted calmly. "I've been reviewing operations personally. I like to see how my managers behave when they think no one is watching." The auditors exchanged subtle nods, confirming his authority. Lowell's face drained of color. "Sir, whatever you've heard, it's not true. These people exaggerate. We've had minor discrepancies, yes, but nothing serious." Ethan pulled out a slim folder from his coat. "Discrepancies? Like the $3,200 you billed for a new refrigeration unit that was never installed? Or the $1,500 in employee overtime hours that were approved by you but never paid out?" Lowell's jaw worked silently. I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Ethan said, his tone razor sharp. "But I'd rather hear from your staff." "Clara?" Clara blinked, startled. "Me?" "Yes," he said gently, turning toward her. "You've worked here the longest, haven't you?" She hesitated, glancing at Lowell. The manager's glare was venomous. "Sir, Tell the truth," Ethan said softly. "That's all I ask." For a long moment, Clara stood frozen, torn between fear and something larger, dignity. Then she exhaled. Mr. Lowell's been pocketing tip money for years. He claims it's to cover register shortages, but the math never adds up. He also cuts hours on payroll so corporate doesn't notice he's shorting us. People have quit because of it. Lowell exploded. Lies. She's just bitter because I won't give her special treatment. Ethan's eyes flashed. Enough. He turned to the auditors. You heard her. Pull every transaction she mentioned. Now. Within minutes, the auditors produced printouts from their tablets, each confirming the theft. Lowell's hands trembled as the numbers stared back at him, undeniable and damning. Ethan looked at him quietly. You could have run a decent business. Instead, you built a kingdom on the backs of people who trusted you. Lowell's voice broke. Please, Mr. Cross, I need this job. Ethan shook his head. No. What you need is integrity. And you lost that long before this conversation. He turned to Clara. How much did he owe you in unpaid overtime? She hesitated. Around $1,200. Maybe more. Ethan nodded slowly, then looked back at Lowell. You'll repay every cent to every employee you stole from. Starting today. And then you'll leave. Lowell's eyes widened. Leave? You're firing me? Ethan's tone was calm, almost cold. You fired yourself the moment you forgot who keeps this place alive. The manager's protests faded as two corporate security officers entered and escorted him out. The cafe fell into stunned silence. Clara felt her hands shaking not from fear, but from release. For the first time in years, Justice had walked through the door wearing a kind face. Ethan turned to the employees. Everyone will receive back pay for the hours and tips stolen. Effective immediately, new policies will be implemented to ensure transparency. This place is going to change. He looked directly at Clara. Starting with you. Her eyes widened. Me? You're the new manager, he said. Effective today. The room erupted. Joy gasped. The dishwashers cheered softly. Clara just stared, mouth open. Sir, I can't. You can, Ethan interrupted gently. You already have. You've been managing this place in spirit for years, without the title, without the respect. It's time that changed. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take it, Ethan said softly. After a long, trembling breath, she nodded. I'll take it. Ethan smiled. Good. Let's start fresh. For the rest of the day, the cafe buzzed with energy unlike anything it had seen before. The tension that had suffocated it for years seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. The customers noticed too. Smiles returned, laughter flowed, and for once, Morning Haven lived up to its name. Clara worked with quiet determination, issuing new schedules, reassigning duties, and organizing proper payroll tracking. She barely had time to process what had just happened. Every so often, she caught Ethan watching her, not as a superior but as someone deeply impressed. When the day finally ended, the last of the employees filtered out, leaving the cafe dimly lit and silent. Ethan lingered by the door. You handled today with grace, he said. She laughed softly. Grace? I felt like I was going to faint. Maybe. But you stood up when it counted. That's what leadership looks like. Clara leaned against the counter. Why me? There must be hundreds of people you could hire, people with degrees, experience. I don't need another executive, Ethan interrupted. I need someone who understands people. Someone who knows what it's like to work for every dollar. That's something you can't teach. She looked down, touched. Thank you. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You earned this long before I showed up. Later that evening, Ethan walked her out. The air was cold, but the city glowed with life. They stopped by the corner where he'd first met her, the same spot where she'd offered him coffee without hesitation. It's strange, Clara said quietly. All this time I thought you were just a delivery driver. I probably said things I shouldn't have. I like that, Ethan said. People treat me differently when they know who I am. You didn't. She smiled faintly. Maybe I should have. Don't, he said gently. I needed to see the world through your eyes again. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of passing cars and the distant music from a nearby bar. Then Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. So what happens now? Now, Ethan said, looking out at the street. Now we rebuild. Together. Her heart skipped, though she couldn't explain why. Together? He met her gaze, eyes steady. Morning Haven isn't just a business. It's a second chance, for everyone including me. She held his stare for a moment, then smiled softly. Then let's make it worth it. As Ethan drove away later that night, he glanced at the cafe one last time. Through the window, Clara was locking up, her silhouette framed by the warm light. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. The empire he had built suddenly mattered again, not because of profit but because of people like her. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was only the beginning of a story far bigger than either could have imagined. The next morning, Clara arrived early, keys jingling in her hand. The cafe smelled different, new paint, new promise. On the counter, she found an envelope with her name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a note from Ethan: "Kindness built this place. Let it run it too." Alongside it, a small key, the key to the manager's office. She smiled, tears welling as the morning sun filtered through the blinds. For once, she didn't feel small. She felt like the world had finally noticed her. And somewhere across town, Ethan Cross looked out the window of his car, his phone buzzing with congratulatory messages from corporate. He ignored them all, thinking only of one truth that had quietly changed him. A single cup of coffee could alter the course of an empire. The morning after Ethan's reveal felt strangely calm. The chaos that had shaken Morning Haven had given way to something softer, steadier, a silence that didn't feel empty but full, like the pause after a storm when the world relearns how to breathe. Clara stood behind the counter, a fresh cup of coffee in her hand, watching the sunlight creep across the tiled floor. For the first time in years, she wasn't dreading the day ahead. The staff trickled in slowly, eyes wide with disbelief, still whispering about what had happened. Joy was the first to break the ice. "So, boss," she said with a grin, "does this mean we finally get real lunch breaks?" Clara laughed, the sound freer than it had been in a long time. "Yes, Joy. Starting today, everyone eats. No skipping meals, no extra shifts without pay, and no one works past their hours unless they volunteer." Joy whooped, throwing her arms in the air. "Finally. I knew there was a reason I liked you." Clara smiled. It still felt strange hearing the word boss aimed at her. Power wasn't something she had ever wanted, she had just wanted fairness. But now that it was in her hands, she was determined to do it right. By mid-morning, the cafe was bustling again. Customers who had heard rumors of the dramatic corporate visit came in out of curiosity. Clara greeted them all, her warmth now unburdened by fear. Even the regulars seemed to notice. One elderly man left a generous tip, whispering, "New energy in here. Feels lighter." She looked around and realized he was right. The air itself seemed different, alive with something intangible, hope. Across town, Ethan sat in his office at the Crosswood headquarters, staring at the city skyline. He should have been preparing for a quarterly review meeting, but his mind kept drifting back to Morning Haven. He could still see Clara's face when she realized who he was, the mix of confusion, awe, and quiet strength. Most people would have groveled or panicked. She had stood her ground. "Mr. Cross." Emily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant entered, tablet in hand. The audit team finished compiling the full report. "Would you like the summary?" "Go ahead." Lowell's misconduct extends beyond the single cafe. He was skimming profits from at least 3 branches in the region. "We've already initiated restitution payments to all affected staff. And, per your request, we've allocated additional bonuses for the employees who stayed through the turmoil." Ethan nodded. "Good. Make sure Clara's name is at the top of that list." Emily smiled knowingly. "Of course, sir." She hesitated, then asked gently, "Do you plan to keep direct oversight of the cafe?" Ethan leaned back thoughtful. "For now, yes. There's something about that place, it reminds me of why I started all this." "Because of the coffee?" she teased lightly. He chuckled. "Because of the people." Back at Morning Haven, Clara spent the afternoon reorganizing the books. She had never seen the full financials before, and the numbers startled her. Lowell's corruption ran deep, yet somehow the place had survived. She stared at the columns of data, overwhelmed but determined. Every dollar now mattered, not just for the cafe but for the people behind it. "Need a hand?" The voice made her look up. Ethan stood at the door, dressed more casually this time. No pretense, no suit jacket, just a wool sweater and that calm, watchful expression she'd come to recognize. Clara blinked. "You're back. I told you I'd be checking in. I thought that meant a call, not another undercover visit." He smiled. "I like to see things for myself." She gestured toward the mountain of paperwork. "Then welcome to reality. Hope you brought coffee." He laughed softly and set 2 cups on the table. "Already did." They worked side by side for hours, reviewing ledgers and balancing accounts. It surprised Clara how easy the silence between them was, not awkward but companionable. Occasionally their hands brushed as they reached for the same file. Each time the air grew heavier, the unspoken connection between them deepening. At one point Ethan paused, studying her. "You're remarkably good at this." Clara looked up, frowning playfully. "At what? Counting numbers?" "At holding things together," he said simply. "Most people would have walked away after what Lowell put you through. But you stayed." She shrugged. "Walking away never fixes what's broken. Sometimes the only way forward is through." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "You really believe that?" "I have to," she said softly. "It's how I've survived." There was something in her tone, an echo of pain she didn't often show. Ethan recognized it instantly. The quiet endurance of someone who'd carried too much for too long. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "Oh?" she asked. "Who?" "My mother," he admitted. "She worked 3 jobs to keep me in school after my father died. Never complained. She used to say people who build their lives on small acts of kindness are the ones who hold the world together. Clara smiled faintly. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. Over the next week, the cafe transformed. Ethan visited regularly, sometimes unannounced, sometimes after hours. He brought in contractors to fix long-neglected equipment, updated the seating and repainted the faded walls in warm amber hues. Customers noticed immediately, the place glowed again. Clara managed the staff with quiet authority. Her leadership style was gentle but firm, rooted in empathy rather than fear. She encouraged her team, listened when they spoke and rewarded honesty. Within days, productivity soared. Ethan watched it all unfold with pride, and something else he couldn't quite name. Every time she laughed, it tugged at a part of him he hadn't felt in years. Her presence disarmed him, made him forget the weight of his empire. But with admiration came danger. Lines blurred easily when hearts got involved. One evening, after closing, Clara locked the register and found Ethan still seated at a corner booth, reviewing notes. "You work more than your own employees," she teased. He smiled without looking up. "Occupational hazard. Or maybe you just don't trust people to do things right." That made him glance up, amused. "Is that what you think?" She crossed her arms, half smiling. "I think you're a man who's used to control. You built an empire with it. But places like this, they run on something you can't calculate." He leaned back, intrigued. "And what's that?" "Faith," she said simply. "The belief that people are good even when the world isn't." He stared at her for a moment, speechless. It wasn't a business lesson, it was a truth he'd forgotten. "Maybe that's why I'm here," he said quietly. "To remember." Later that night, Clara walked him to the door. The street outside shimmered under the glow of the lampposts. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his coat against her arm. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you really come back today?" He hesitated. "Because I needed to see what kindness looks like when it's given power." She blinked, unsure how to respond. He smiled, tipping his head slightly. "You're doing more than running a cafe, Clara. You're setting an example. For me. For all of us." Then, before she could speak, he stepped into the night, his silhouette fading into the city's hum. The next morning brought a new challenge. A group of journalists had caught wind of the incident with Lowell and showed up for interviews. Clara panicked at first, she'd never dealt with media attention. But Ethan arrived just in time. "Let them in," he said calmly. "Tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." Together, they spoke to reporters, explaining how the cafe had turned around thanks to its staff. Clara's humility won every headline. By evening, articles titled, "Waitress Turns Cafe Around After Standing Up to Corruption," flooded local news. Social media called her the Coffee Angel, a name that made her laugh until her eyes watered. Ethan watched from the sidelines, quietly proud. When he finally approached her that evening, she looked at him in disbelief. "This is insane," she said. "I'm not a hero." "You are," he said simply. "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear aprons." She rolled her eyes, but she couldn't hide her smile. A few days later, Ethan invited her to dinner, not as her boss but as her friend. They met at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Clara wore a simple blue dress, her hair pinned up. When Ethan saw her, he froze for a heartbeat. Gone was the exhausted waitress. Before him stood a woman radiant with quiet confidence. Over dinner they talked about everything: life, lost dreams. Clara shared stories about her brother's ambitions and her parents' struggles. Ethan opened up about the loneliness of success, how building an empire had cost him connection. "Money doesn't buy peace," he said, swirling his glass. "It just buys silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest thing of all." Clara studied him. "Maybe you're just listening in the wrong places." Their eyes met across the candlelight, the air thick with unspoken emotion. For a long moment, neither looked away. Then she smiled. "You know, you're not what I expected a billionaire to be." He chuckled. "And you're not what I expected a waitress to be." They both laughed, the sound blending with the hum of the city below. By the time Ethan walked her home, the sky had turned velvet black. They stopped outside her apartment building, the air cool and still. He hesitated before speaking. "Clara, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "This, what you've done, it's more than fixing a cafe. You've reminded me why I started everything. You've reminded me what leadership should look like." She met his gaze, eyes bright. "Then promise me you'll keep it that way." "I will," he said softly. "As long as you keep reminding me." For a moment they stood there, two lives intersecting under the faint glow of a street lamp. The distance between them felt both fragile and infinite. And though neither spoke it aloud, they both knew something had begun. Something delicate, something real. When Ethan finally returned to his penthouse, he found himself unable to sleep. The empire he had spent years building suddenly felt small compared to the warmth of a cafe run by a woman who believed in kindness. He looked out over the city lights and smiled faintly. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about growth charts or quarterly profits. He was thinking about Clara Bennett, and the way one act of compassion had changed both of their worlds forever. Weeks passed and Morning Haven thrived like never before. The small cafe that had once struggled to stay afloat now buzzed with new life. The walls were freshly painted in warm shades of amber and cream, new lighting glowed softly above the tables, and a scent of freshly ground coffee beans mixed with laughter filled the air each morning. The regulars returned with smiles and new customers arrived daily, drawn by the story that had spread like wildfire, the waitress who turned her boss's business around. Clara still found it hard to believe. Every time someone recognized her from the article or called her a hero, she'd laugh it off. In her mind, she'd just done what was right. But inside something had changed. For the first time she felt worthy, not of praise but of being seen. Ethan had continued visiting. Not every day but often enough that his presence became something quietly expected. The staff had grown used to seeing him sit at his corner table, sleeves rolled up, helping Clara review budgets or discuss ideas. Though he still carried himself with the composure of a man used to power, there was a softness in him now, something human and warm. He didn't just invest in numbers anymore, he invested in people. And somehow Clara had become the center of it all. One quiet afternoon the cafe emptied between rushes. Clara leaned on the counter sipping her coffee when Ethan walked in. He wasn't in his usual suit. Instead he wore a simple gray sweater, his hair slightly tousled. He looked less like a billionaire and more like the man she'd met that first day, the one who'd looked exhausted, grateful and real. "You're early," she said, smiling. He grinned. "Couldn't stay away. Thought I'd see how my favorite manager was holding up." She rolled her eyes. "Favorite? I'm your only one." "Still counts." They shared a laugh. Then Ethan glanced around the cafe. "You've done something special here, Clara. The numbers are up 40% in a month. Customer reviews are glowing. Even corporate's impressed." She shook her head. "It wasn't just me. Everyone worked hard." "Maybe," he said, "but everyone followed your lead. That's what leadership is, turning effort into purpose." Clara smiled, touched. "You sound like a motivational speaker." He laughed. "Maybe I've been spending too much time around you." Their eyes met for a beat longer than usual. Then she looked away, flustered, pretending to wipe down the counter. Ethan noticed but said nothing. Instead he walked toward the window, hands in his pockets, watching the street outside. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about expanding Morning Haven. Not just the brand but the idea. What if we made it a model for community cafes? Fair wages, transparent pay, employee ownership shares." Clara blinked. "You'd actually do that?" "I would if you'd run it with me." Her jaw fell slightly. "Run it with you?" He turned, meeting her eyes. "As a partner, Clara. Not an employee. You've proven you can lead with integrity. I trust you." For a moment words failed her. "Ethan, I don't even have a business degree." "Good," he interrupted gently. "Degrees teach you management. You already understand people. That's rarer." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "It's a huge responsibility." He smiled faintly. "So was buying coffee for a stranger." Her breath caught. That memory, so small, so ordinary, suddenly felt monumental. It was the act that had started everything. She looked down, blushing. "You remember that?" "Every day," he said softly. "Because it reminded me that real value doesn't come from wealth, it comes from decency." Their eyes locked again. This time neither looked away. That evening, as the last customer left, Clara and Ethan sat across from each other in the quiet cafe. The lights were dimmed, the world outside painted in gold and gray. Papers and notebooks were scattered between them, plans, projections, sketches for a new branch. But the conversation had drifted far beyond business. "So, what did you want to be?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Before all this." Clara smiled wistfully. "A teacher. I loved books. Loved explaining things. But after my parents died, life got in the way." "You still teach," he said. She frowned. "How do you figure that?" "You teach people how to care. How to see others. That's more valuable than anything in a classroom." Her chest warmed at his words. "You always know what to say, don't you?" He laughed. "I used to think I did. Now I just say what I mean." The honesty in his tone made her heart ache in a way that was both frightening and beautiful. There was something raw about him, something unpolished beneath the layers of power and precision. And as she looked at him, she realized she wasn't just grateful, she was drawn to him. Ethan noticed the shift too. The way her gaze lingered, the way her voice softened. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the air thick with the electricity of unspoken truth. Then Clara cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "We should finalize the schedule for next week." Ethan smiled gently. "Of course." But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Days turned into weeks. The cafe continued to flourish. Ethan's visits became less about oversight and more about companionship. They'd share quiet lunches, trade jokes over receipts, and sometimes just sit in silence, drinking coffee as the city pulsed outside. But not everyone viewed their growing closeness kindly. Rumors began to swirl, customers whispering, staff speculating. The boss and the waitress. It wasn't malicious, just curious, but Clara hated it nonetheless. She'd worked too hard to earn respect on her own. One evening after closing, she confronted Ethan about it. "They're talking," she said quietly, arms folded. "About what?" "Us." Ethan leaned back, expression unreadable. "Let them talk." "It's not that simple," she said, frustrated. "You're my boss. Well, my partner now, I guess. But people will twist it. They'll think I got here because of you." He stood, walking closer. "Clara, anyone who's seen how hard you work knows better." "Maybe," she said softly. "But I don't want to be someone's story. I want to be my own." Ethan paused, then nodded. "You're right." He hesitated, then added, "If you want me to stay away for a while, I will." Her heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "That's not what I meant." "I know. But maybe it's what's best." She looked at him, torn. "And what about the expansion?" He smiled faintly. "We'll handle it remotely. I trust you." The finality in his tone stung more than she expected. She wanted to protest, to tell him not to go, but pride held her tongue. "If that's what you think is best," she said quietly. He nodded once. "For now." And with that he left. The days that followed felt emptier. Clara buried herself in work, pretending not to notice how quiet the cafe felt without him. But every time she passed the corner booth where he used to sit, something inside her ached. At night, she'd catch herself rereading the note he'd left her weeks ago. "Kindness built this place. Let it run it too." She traced the words with her finger, wondering if he'd meant more than business when he wrote them. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to focus on his empire. He attended meetings, signed contracts, smiled through interviews. But no matter how busy he became, his thoughts drifted back to Morning Haven. The sound of Clara's laugh, the way she looked at him like he was just a man, not a millionaire. He'd spent years building a fortress around his life, and somehow she had walked straight through it. One night, sitting alone in his penthouse, he made a decision. He opened his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and called her. "Clara?" She froze at the sound of his voice. "Ethan?" "I know it's late," he said, "but there's something I need to say." Her heart raced. "What is it?" "I left because I thought it was the right thing to do, for your reputation, for your independence. But I realized something." She held her breath. "What?" "That staying away doesn't make me respect you more. It just makes me miserable." Her eyes stung. "Ethan, I don't want to interfere with your success. But I also can't pretend that what's between us doesn't exist. So I'm asking you, can I come back?" There was a long silence. Then Clara laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't ask like a billionaire, you know that?" He smiled through the phone. "That's because you made me forget how." "Then yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Come back." The next morning when she walked into the cafe, Ethan was already there. Not in a suit, not in disguise, just himself. He looked up as she entered, and the world seemed to quiet around them. "You came back," she said, her voice small but full of relief. "I told you," he said softly, "I'm better at showing up than staying away." For a moment, neither moved. Then Clara crossed the room and hugged him. It was instinctive, unplanned, and real. The kind of embrace that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "We're still partners, you know. Business partners." He laughed. "For now." She rolled her eyes. "You're impossible." "And you," he said gently, "are extraordinary." That day marked a new beginning. They worked side by side again, not just as colleagues but as something deeper, two souls who had found meaning in each other's strength. The cafe flourished, expanding into new locations with the same values Clara had built it on: fairness, empathy, and human connection. And though rumors still floated, neither of them cared anymore. They had weathered worse. They had found something real. Late one evening, as they closed up shop, Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Clara and said with a grin, "For old time's sake." She smiled, taking the cup. "You know, it's funny." "What is?" "This all started because I bought a stranger a coffee." He raised his cup in a toast. "And I've been trying to repay that debt ever since." Their laughter filled the room, warm and alive. And outside, beneath the glow of the city lights, Morning Haven stood as a quiet testament to everything they had built, not from wealth or ambition but from something far rarer. From kindness. The next few months brought success beyond anything Clara or Ethan could have imagined. Morning Haven wasn't just a cafe anymore, it was a movement. Local newspapers began calling it the heart of the city, a place where compassion met coffee. Other entrepreneurs started visiting to learn how to replicate its culture, and soon the cafe's model, fair wages, profit sharing, community outreach, was being adopted across the state. The story of the waitress and the secret owner had gone viral, inspiring thousands. But with growth came attention, and with attention came scrutiny. One crisp morning, as Clara unlocked the cafe, she found a thick envelope taped to the door. It wasn't from corporate, it was from a law firm. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal complaint filed by Gregory Lowell, the former manager they'd fired months ago. He was suing Ethan's company for wrongful termination and defamation. Her stomach sank. Lowell claimed that Ethan had conspired with Clara to destroy his reputation and that the cafe's viral fame had caused him emotional distress and professional ruin. The demand for damages exceeded $500,000. Clara closed her eyes, the world spinning. Everything they'd built, everything she'd worked for, was now at risk. Ethan arrived moments later, coffee in hand, his usual calm replaced with concern when he saw her pale face. "What happened?" he asked, setting his cup down. She handed him the envelope. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. "He's bluffing." "But what if he's not?" she said softly. "What if this hurts the cafe?" Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "It won't. I'll handle it. You've already done enough. This happened because of me." He shook his head. "No, Clara. This happened because a dishonest man couldn't accept accountability. You did nothing wrong." She wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her chest. "Still, the media's going to have a field day." Ethan reached across the counter, his hand brushing hers gently. "Then let them. We've told the truth. That's all that matters." His touch calmed her, but only slightly. There were battles kindness couldn't always shield you from, and this was one of them. Within days the story broke. Headlines blared across local networks. Disgraced manager files lawsuit against cafe owner and waitress. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing. Customers hesitated to visit. Online commenters debated whether Clara had manipulated the situation to climb the ladder. The narrative that had once uplifted her was now being twisted. Clara stopped checking social media after the first week. The comments were cruel. Words like gold digger and opportunist appeared under her name. It didn't matter that she'd earned everything honestly, people believed what they wanted. Ethan noticed the light in her eyes dimming. He tried to reassure her, but she withdrew, afraid that even being seen with him would fuel the gossip. One evening after closing, she sat alone in the darkened cafe, staring at the empty chairs. When Ethan entered quietly, she didn't look up. "They're saying things that aren't true," she murmured. "But it feels like it doesn't matter." He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "It matters to me." She sighed. "You don't get it, Ethan. You have money, power, your name can survive this. Mine can't. People like me don't get second chances." He hesitated, his voice softer. "You think I haven't lost things because of this? Investors are questioning my judgment, accusing me of letting emotions cloud my decisions. But I don't care. You're worth it." She turned to him, startled. "Worth what?" "The truth," he said quietly. "And whatever it costs to defend it." Their eyes met, and something broke inside her, an invisible dam she'd built to protect herself. For weeks she'd buried her feelings beneath fear and duty. But now, looking at him, steady, resolute, unflinching, she felt them rush to the surface. "Ethan," she whispered. He reached for her hand. "We'll get through this, Clara. Together." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. For once she allowed herself to believe him. The court hearings dragged on for months. Lowell's lawyers argued viciously, painting him as a victim of corporate betrayal. But Ethan's legal team was meticulous. They produced audits, witness statements, even security footage proving Lowell's misconduct. Each piece of evidence dismantled his story, yet the process was exhausting. Clara had to testify twice. Both times she stood firm, voice steady even under pressure. Ethan watched from the gallery, pride swelling with every word. She spoke not as a victim but as a woman who refused to be silenced. When the verdict finally came, it was decisive. The court ruled in favor of Ethan and Clara. Lowell's claims were dismissed as baseless. The judge commended Morning Haven's transparency and integrity. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but this time Clara didn't hide. She looked straight into the lenses and said, "Truth doesn't need defending, it just needs to be lived." The clip went viral. Within hours, millions watched her words, calling her an icon of resilience. For every cruel comment that had once haunted her, 100 messages of support now poured in. That night, Ethan hosted a small celebration at the cafe. The staff laughed, toasted, and danced among the tables. But when the crowd thinned, he found Clara standing by the window looking out at the city lights. "You should be proud," he said softly. "You stood up to everything." She smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I couldn't have done it without you either." She turned to face him. "You mean that?" "Every word." He took a breath, his expression shifting to something deeper. "You once told me you didn't want to be someone's story, you wanted to be your own. But Clara, you've become both. You're part of mine, and you've written yours in a way no one can erase." Her heart skipped. The air between them felt fragile, electric. "Ethan," she began, but he stepped closer, closing the distance. "I meant what I said the night I called you," he whispered. "Staying away was the hardest thing I've ever done. Because somewhere between those coffee cups and business meetings, I stopped seeing you as my employee. She looked up, eyes glistening. Then what do you see me as? He smiled softly. As the person who reminded me what love is supposed to feel like. Her breath caught. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly she reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, the simple gesture saying everything words couldn't. Weeks later, Ethan made an announcement at a company press conference. Morning Haven would become a cornerstone of a new social enterprise, Haven and Heart, a national chain of cafes dedicated to ethical business practices and community service. He credited Clara as co-founder and creative director. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters snapped photos, their flashes illuminating her stunned expression. Afterward, as the room emptied, she turned to him. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. But I wanted to. You earned it. She shook her head, still dazed. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He smiled. Besides, you can't argue with the owner. She laughed through tears. You're impossible. And you, he said softly, are unforgettable. The first Haven and Heart location opened 6 months later, right across from the original Morning Haven. On opening day, a long line wrapped around the block. The mayor cut the ribbon, reporters filled the sidewalks, and customers cheered. As Clara stood beside Ethan, holding his hand, she felt the weight of every moment that had led to this. The burnt coffee, the long shifts, the nights she doubted herself. It all suddenly made sense. When she stepped up to give her speech, her voice didn't waver. This started as a simple act, she said. A cup of coffee shared between strangers. I didn't know who he was then. I just saw someone who needed kindness. And that's the point. Kindness doesn't wait for titles. It doesn't care about status. It simply gives. That's what built this place. And that's what will keep it alive. The crowd erupted into applause. Ethan looked at her, eyes full of pride. Later, when the ceremony ended, they slipped away to the quiet rooftop above the cafe. The city stretched before them, glowing with possibility. You did it, Ethan said softly. We did it, she corrected. He smiled. You always have to have the last word, don't you? She grinned. Only when I'm right. They stood side by side watching the city pulse below. Then Ethan spoke, voice low but certain. Clara, I've spent my life chasing success. But I think this place, is the only thing that's ever made me feel truly alive. She turned to him, eyes shining. Then don't let it go. He smiled, stepping closer. I wasn't planning to. And as the wind brushed past them, he kissed her, slow, tender, and inevitable. The city lights blurred into gold, the noise faded into nothing, and for the first time both of them stopped running. They had found what they'd been searching for all along, not in wealth, not in ambition, but in each other. Months later, the world knew their story, but to them, it remained something deeply personal. A testament to what can happen when empathy meets courage. When a simple act of kindness changes not just one life, but two, and ripples outward to touch countless others. Morning Haven became a symbol across the country. Ethan and Clara's partnership, rooted in equality, compassion, and quiet strength, redefined what leadership could look like. And every morning before the doors opened, Ethan would pour 2 cups of coffee. One for himself, one for Clara. He'd hand it to her with the same smile he'd worn that very first day, and she'd always say the same words. Still the best coffee I ever bought. It had been 1 year since the day the cafe changed everything. 1 year since a cup of coffee sparked an empire built on compassion instead of greed. And now, as dawn spilled across the skyline, Clara stood before the glass windows of the original Morning Haven, watching the first rays of sunlight hit the golden logo she and Ethan had designed together, Haven and Heart. Beneath it, in small script, read the words she'd chosen herself, kindness brews here. The world had shifted in quiet, profound ways. What began as a single cafe in a struggling neighborhood had blossomed into a national chain with over 40 locations. Each one followed the same principle: fair wages, second chances, and a promise that kindness would never be mistaken for weakness. Ethan had made sure of that, not as the mogul overseeing an empire, but as a man who finally understood what real wealth meant. Clara turned as the front door opened. Ethan entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. His smile was the same, calm, steady, genuine. But the man himself had changed. There was less polish now, less armor. He was no longer the untouchable businessman behind marble walls. He had become someone grounded, the kind of man who found peace in simplicity. You're here early, she said, smiling. He handed her the cup. Could say the same about you. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I think about how far we've come. Ethan nodded, gazing around the cafe. Feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? When you bought me that coffee. She laughed softly. I was just being polite. And I was just pretending not to be the owner, he said with a grin. Funny how the smallest things change everything. Maybe not funny, she said, her tone thoughtful. Maybe meant to be. He looked at her for a moment, admiration shining in his eyes. You still believe in fate, don't you? I believe in people, she said simply. And sometimes the right people find each other when they need to. As the day began, employees arrived one by one, their laughter filling the space. Clara greeted each of them by name, a habit she insisted on keeping even as the company grew. To her, leadership wasn't about titles or authority, it was about remembering that everyone mattered. By mid-morning, a crowd began forming outside. Today marked a milestone, the one-year anniversary of Haven and Heart's founding. Dozens of journalists, community leaders, and customers had gathered to celebrate. There was even talk of a special documentary being filmed about the movement's origins. Clara had spent weeks preparing, but her nerves fluttered all the same. She had never wanted fame. Public speaking made her anxious, and yet she knew this moment wasn't about her. It was about what they had built together. Ethan noticed her unease and stepped closer. Nervous? She exhaled. Terrified. He smiled reassuringly. You'll do fine. You always do. You say that every time. And I'm always right. She chuckled, shaking her head. You're insufferable. Confident? He corrected. Overconfident. He leaned in slightly, voice low and teasing. You didn't seem to mind that last time we argued. Her cheeks flushed, but before she could respond, the event coordinator waved for them to come to the stage. The ceremony began with applause. Ethan spoke first, his voice calm but commanding. He spoke of accountability, empathy, and the necessity of reimagining business ethics. The crowd listened intently, hanging on every word. But when he invited Clara to speak, something extraordinary happened. As she stepped forward, the applause grew thunderous. She looked out at the sea of faces, employees from every branch, customers, even children wearing Haven and Heart shirts, and for a moment her breath caught. She wasn't the timid waitress anymore. She wasn't even just a manager or a co-founder. She was the soul of this place. None of this, she began, started as a business idea. It started as a choice, one simple act of kindness that asked for nothing in return. That's all. And somehow that was enough to start a chain reaction. We live in a world that tells us success comes from taking, from competing, from stepping on whoever's in the way. But we've proven something different here. We've shown that success built on compassion doesn't just last, it multiplies. The audience grew quiet. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. I used to think kindness was fragile, she continued, that it broke easily in a world as harsh as ours. But I was wrong. Kindness isn't fragile. It's fierce. It changes people, and through people it changes everything. When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause that shook the walls. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes, including Ethan's. He looked at her like a man who'd found something sacred. Afterward, when the reporters swarmed them for interviews, Clara gently excused herself. He's the businessman, she told them, pointing to Ethan. Ask him about numbers. I'll be in the kitchen. But Ethan stopped her, pulling her aside. You were incredible. She smiled shyly. I was terrified. You didn't sound it. That's because I was too busy trying not to faint. He laughed, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then he said softly, I used to believe profit was the goal. But after you, I realized it's just the echo. The real goal is purpose. She blinked, caught off guard. That's beautiful. It's true. Weeks passed and their work deepened. Haven and Heart opened new branches in underserved neighborhoods, partnering with local shelters and training programs for people seeking a second chance. Former inmates, single mothers, veterans, and refugees all found employment and dignity in those coffee shops. Clara personally visited each new branch before its opening, often serving coffee herself to remind everyone what the mission stood for. Ethan traveled with her sometimes. They'd visit cities together, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, always blending business with small moments of laughter and discovery. It became their ritual, exploring hidden cafes, walking in the rain, talking about life. What had begun as partnership had evolved into something unspoken yet undeniable. One night, while visiting the Chicago branch, they found themselves alone on the rooftop terrace overlooking the lake. The city lights shimmered across the water. Ethan turned to her. You ever think about how strange it all is? How one small gesture changed everything? All the time, she said. I still don't understand why you came back that day. He smiled softly. Because you reminded me what mattered. And because I couldn't stay away. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? He shook his head. Never. You taught me that power means nothing if it doesn't lift others. And love? He paused, searching her eyes. Love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up. Over and over again. Her heart thudded in her chest. You talk like a poet now. Maybe I finally learned to listen. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath. Clara, I've waited to say this the right way. She swallowed, her pulse quickening. Say what? That I love you. Not as the man who owns these cafes. Not as your partner. But as the man who's grateful for every single day you let me stand beside you. Her eyes filled with tears. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You're late." He blinked, confused. "Late?" She smiled through her tears. "I've loved you for months." He laughed softly, the sound breaking into a sigh of relief. Then he took her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and deep, like time itself had been waiting for this moment. The city below blurred into a sea of gold and silver. By the end of the year, Haven and Heart had become a household name. Documentaries were made, awards were given, and politicians cited their model as the future of ethical business. But through it all, Ethan and Clara remained the same. They worked side by side, refusing to let fame erode the simplicity that had built their empire. On quiet evenings, they'd sit in the original cafe, just the two of them, closing out registers and cleaning tables like old times. No boardrooms, no cameras, just the comfort of shared silence. One such night, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You ever think we'll outgrow this place?" Clara smiled. "Never. This is home." He nodded. "Home," he repeated as if tasting the word for the first time. She looked around at the cozy space, the photographs on the wall, the staff laughter drifting from the back room, the warm glow of lights that never seemed too bright. "You know," she said quietly, "for a long time I thought home was something you lost when life got hard. But now I realize it's something you build, one act of kindness at a time." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "And you built this one beautifully." She squeezed his hand gently. "We built it." Months later, tragedy nearly struck. A powerful storm hit the city, flooding several streets and damaging nearby businesses. The cafe's roof began leaking and power outages shut down operations for 2 days. But Clara refused to close the doors completely. Instead, she turned the cafe into a refuge. They lit candles, served free hot drinks to people stranded in the rain, and opened their kitchen to prepare meals for families without power. Ethan joined the staff, sleeves rolled up, helping wherever needed. Reporters arrived again, but this time, not for scandal or spectacle. They came to witness humanity at its best. When the storm finally cleared, Haven and Heart wasn't just standing, it was stronger than ever. Donations poured in from across the country to repair damages. But Clara insisted every extra dollar be used for community rebuilding instead. "The cafe will heal," she said. "Let's make sure the people do too." Ethan couldn't have been prouder. "You never stop amazing me," he told her that night. She smiled wearily. "I just try to do what's right." "You don't just do what's right," he said. "You remind the rest of us how." Years later, the story of Haven and Heart became a case study taught in universities. Clara and Ethan's philosophy, leading with empathy, sparked a new wave of social entrepreneurship. And though their names were known worldwide, they never lost their humility. On their wedding day, they didn't choose a ballroom or a mansion. They married right there in Morning Haven, surrounded by the people who had been there since the beginning: Joy, the first customer who'd believed in Clara, and the countless employees who had become family. When Ethan saw Clara walking down the aisle between rows of cafe tables decorated with candles and flowers, his breath caught. She wore no diamonds, no extravagance, just a simple white dress and that same quiet strength he had fallen in love with. When the officiant asked for vows, Ethan went first. "I spent half my life chasing success," he said. "And then I met you and realized I'd been measuring it all wrong. You showed me that true success isn't what you build, it's who you build it with." Clara smiled through tears. "And you showed me that power isn't something to fear. It's something to share. You taught me that even the strongest people need kindness, and that love isn't weakness, it's what makes us human." When they kissed, the cafe erupted in applause, laughter, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Outside, the evening sun dipped low, painting the world in shades of gold. Years later, when they grew older, Morning Haven still stood. It had become a landmark, a symbol of how one act of compassion could ripple across generations. Visitors came from all over to see the spot where the story began, the exact counter where Clara had handed Ethan that first cup of coffee. Sometimes, when she worked behind the counter, still insisting on brewing her own coffee despite her fame, people would recognize her. They'd smile shyly and say, "You're the woman from the story." And she'd always reply, "I'm just the woman who bought coffee for a stranger." Ethan would sit nearby, pretending to read but always watching her with the same warmth as he had that very first day. Every so often she'd catch his eye and grin. "Still pretending you're not the boss?" she'd tease. He'd smile back. "Still pretending you're not the hero?" In the end, their story wasn't about wealth or romance or fame. It was about something far simpler, the belief that goodness could still change the world. And somewhere between the scent of roasted beans and the quiet hum of morning conversations, their legacy lived on, in every cup served, every kindness shared, and every heart that remembered that one small act could spark a revolution. Because in a world obsessed with taking, Ethan and Clara had proven that giving was the most powerful act of all. And long after they were gone, the sign above the door still glowed in soft amber light. "Haven and Heart, kindness brews here."